Alright, so I can't sleep, so you know what time it is. Time for another scripted video. This time we're going to be covering the fourth best class in the game, in my opinion, which is Necromancer. I've been going in order. Now, I don't have a Rogue. I don't play Rogue. I think Rogue is busted, so they're number one. Number two is Druid. Druid's pretty good, pretty strong. It require heavy legendary aspect investment, though, for the build to be viable. Number three is Barbarian. Kind of balanced, has this weird approach where it can feel very sluggish and boring to play, kind of combo based. The gear for it relatively sucks outside of one or two pieces, and you're going to find yourself a lot of times in this interesting boat of just not giving a fuck. However, when it comes to Necromancer, and why Necromancer was at fourth, Necromancer has some big problems that are tied to it. The first thing I'm going to cover is a gear-specific thing. Necromancer is the only class in the game right now that can run a shield for whatever reason, which seems really kind of stupid. Now, most classes in the game, whether they are that run either a one-hander and an offhand or a two-handed weapon, generally tend to run the one-hander and the offhand for the extra legendary aspect. 90% of Necromancers out there seem to be running a two-hander, whereas I'm in the minority. On my Sorcerers and my Druids, I run a two-hander. On my Necromancers, I run the one-hander because of the shield, because shields are pretty good defensively, and that's going to be very important later on. The issue that I have with this design philosophy is that the shields could be a little bit better designed, and or shields could be useful on other classes. I don't know why Sorcerers can't use a shield. I get why Druid can't. I get why Rogue can't. I get why Barbarian can't. I don't understand why Sorcerers can't. And I think if they were to introduce another class into the game that could use a shield, whether that's Blood Knights like Diablo Immortal, whether that's Crusaders like D3, whether that's Paladins like D2, I think they would need a little bit of a rework. So shields by default give bonus main hand damage to your primary. It's not as good as a focus is, but it is percentage based. So if you do have a cracked primary option, you can actually get more than having a fixed damage amount, although that is pretty rare. You get a flat block chance, you get a flock damage reduction when you block, you get flat thorns, plus you get your other random buffs that you can re-roll. Necromancers as a whole do kind of want to run thorns, at least to a minor degree. They're the other class alongside Barbarian that wants to focus on this a little bit more. Shields definitely do that quite well. Let's talk about the bigger problem that faces Necromancer. There's two main issues that make Necromancer feel very bad to play. One is to summon or not to summon. Number two is just the glass cannonness of the class. So, in all fairness, if you do want to discount my view on this, there are three main builds that you have. You have Blood, you have Bone, you have the Blight, which is basically Darkness. I have not fully tested Darkness. And when I say I have not fully tested Darkness, mostly it's just like Blight. Like, I haven't played around too much with Blight. I haven't played around with the legendary aspects for Blight. I've played around with Sever. Sever's pretty good. But if you want to sit there and say, oh, well, he hasn't tested Darkness extensively, okay, fine, then. But at least on Blood, Bone, and just generic, like, summoning, I can say I have a decent experience with. The main problem that Necromancer has nothing to do with its damage options, because I'm going to sum up all of its damage options very quickly. The Bone build relies on a couple of key things. Bone Splinters, which multiple projectiles, each projectile has an independent lucky hit chance and essence generation. Meaning if one Bone Splinter cast of 3 splinters hits an enemy, that is 24 essence. So it's good for that. Generally, you're not doing that. Bone build wants to sit in the back and play range. Bone Splinters. You get extra bones if you're over essence. good chance to make things vulnerable, or crit chance if you randomly hit someone with all three. Mainly you're running this for the vulnerable. Bone Splinter is one of those basic skills that's good on Necromancer all the time pretty much because of the chance to make vulnerable. This gives you an extra damage bucket, which is very good for building. Bone Spear. Bone Spear has been nerfed into the ground. Bone Spear is still viable. It's a 50% lucky hit chance, and it functions as sort of a tactical nuke when you throw it out. Legendary aspects are good. It crits a lot. It has vulnerable. Vulnerable and crit stacking is very good. Now, Bone Spear and Bone Splinters make a very good 1-2 type combo. Spear, Splinter, Spear, Splinter type gameplay loop. And they do very well, especially if you use Splinters to make enemies vulnerable, then you use Spear for the crit. Very good. 10 out of 10 gameplay loop. Boring, but it nukes everything on the screen. Even after it got nerfed, it just nukes everything quite well. Bone Spirit is kind of a mini ultimate. What it does is it consumes all of your essence when you cast it. It deals flat damage, and then it deals bonus damage for each point of essence spent casting it. Now it says it explodes and deals area of effect damage. It is not a very large area of effect. This is a solid nuke skill as well. This is very good if you like it. The downside is it does have a cooldown on it, which I really don't like that it has a cooldown on top of costing all of your essence, but it is what it is. It crits. It's very good at nuking an individual target. Although you will oftentimes find yourself as a Necromancer, as a Bone Necro, you will find yourself using Bone Spear and spamming that repetitively, much more often than using one Bone Spirit. So unfortunately, as good as this skill is, you'll end up unequipping it. Next, we're going to cover the Blood build. The Blood build has 3 components. Hemorrhage, which is a very good basic skill again. Hemorrhage has a 20% chance when you hit to form a Blood Orb. Blood Orbs heal you whenever they're picked up. In addition to that, your first modifier makes it so that when you pick up a Blood Orb, your next Hemorrhage deals area of effect damage and gives you bonus essence. This gives you an extra skill. Now, while Hemorrhage isn't a very good damage option, it does generate very quickly because of that. And you can also get either Fortify or Attack Speed. Hemorrhage is generically useful for the Fortify as a defensive skill. And the main reason for that is because this class doesn't have good defensive options. You're very glass cannon. So Fortify Necromancer is very good specifically on Blood. Blood can generate a lot of Fortify. Your 2 damage options are both very good, both with different play styles. I find that running both of these is the best bet, although you can choose one or the other. Blood Surge is basically an AoE. It deals a little bit of damage up front and then does a Nova, like a little shockwave around you. The main value you get out of this is you get a small heal if you hit a large enough group of enemies, and the fact that you can either get a massive amount of Fortify, or you can get a guaranteed overpower by casting this. Blood skills like to overpower. This is a very good baby's first Necromancer build for leveling. If you were leveling as a Necromancer from 1 to 40, 1 to 45, I would recommend the Blood build pretty much exclusively. It's the most fun to play, it hits hard, it stays alive, it nukes the screen, but it's difficult to get decent legendary aspects. There's 1 legendary aspect for Blood Surge, 1 legendary aspect for Blood Lance that are relatively common that deal good damage. Everything after that is just a slog for aspects. Blood Nova, on the other hand, is a single target skill that can be good. Basically, you're throwing at a bone spear that's made out of blood. But the difference on the bone spear is that it pierces through the first enemy it hits, and lances. So it has this kind of zigzaggy, jagged effect where you hit an enemy, and if you hit them a second time, it's going to jut to another enemy and keep chaining like that. You can get bonus attack speed when you lance multiple enemies, or you can get a guaranteed overpower again after casting. You can see how these are very good. Believe it or not, the main value to Blood Lance comes in its low essence cost. You can kind of just spam these fuckers out for a very low essence cost compared to almost any other build in the game. It's 15 versus the 24, 29, 24. The 19 on Sever isn't bad, but that one is much more time consuming than Blood Lance is. Because of this, oftentimes I find myself in this interesting position where it's like, yeah, I like Blood Lance because I can just spam out a ton of these and get some good damage, but Blood Surge deals more damage in the long run by hitting more enemies. So these two skills are both very good. Remember I said I'm not going to cover Blight, I'm not going to cover Sever. Not 100% great on that. Covering your other two basic skills that you have is fairly simple. Decompose is a channeled ability, meaning you hold down the button, it deals damage per second like Incinerate does, it generates essence per second. Unlike Incinerate, it forms corpses. This is very good for a corpse build. So, the reason why bro, stop trading. The reason why Decompose is a little lower on the list is that where it is a channeled basic ability, you're kind of just sitting there in one place holding your hand up. Now it does have decent effects. You deal bonus damage, your minions deal bonus damage, you generate bonus essence off of that, it slows, there's good legendary aspects for it, although you get them later on in the game. This is one of those skills that is good in specific builds. It requires a lot to build around, which makes it a little bit weaker in that it's not as beginner friendly as Hemorrhage and Bone Splinters, which are much more spammable. Reap is on the higher end of tiers. It doesn't produce a large amount of essence compared to other skills. The main reason you run this is similar to Storm Strike for Druid. It gives you damage reduction just by hitting an enemy. And this stacks with the legendary aspect where basic skills give you 20% damage reduction for 2 to 6 seconds. So, if you have the low roll on that, which is 2 seconds, basically each time you hit an enemy with Reap, you have 35% damage reduction for 2 seconds. Not really hard to manage. Pretty good overall skill. This one right here, Enhanced Reap, is relatively hard to trigger. Basically, if an enemy that you hit dies within 2 seconds, basically that means you need to hit the skill, and then you need to kill it with whatever your next skill that you immediately cast is. You get bonus attack speed. This does allow you to chain multiple Reap, kill something, Reap, now I'm getting faster Reap, so I'm more reliably killing things. However, Reap's damage overall isn't very good. This skill is mainly a skill you're using for the damage reduction rather than anything else. The corpse skill version of it is weak, Decompose is better. The instant kill is very weak because it doesn't scale. It only works on enemies that are below 5% life, which means you're basically going to kill them in another Reap anyways. It's not a very good skill outside of the gimmicky, I can have a lot of damage reduction off of this. So these two require a bit more knowledge to be useful. They are shadow skills. There's plenty of legendary aspects that turn shadow into cold. There's this little mini cold build that Necromancer has going on. So in terms of your damage options, Blood is definitely the most beginner friendly. Bone is more of the nuke option, whereas Shadow is more legendary aspect dependent and much more skill based. So why have I spent all this time explaining these damage skills? All of these damage skills feel very good to play. For the most part, all of your basic skills have value. Similar to Druid, similar to Barbarian. Similar to Rogue, where we said these classes are stronger classes because their basic skills have value in the later game. Which, this is the big thing that keeps Necromancer at 4 and Sorceress at 5. So, this is all out of the way. Defensive and utility is the #1 problem that kills Necromancer. Now, let's start with Book of the Dead. First off, if you want to run Summon, you lose 2 slots out of your 6 slots. Okay? Now, you notice this is a sacrifice build. Okay? Here's the problem, though. Sacrifices aren't impactful enough. Now, thank God that the warriors and the mages are both tied to 1 button. If they weren't tied to 1 button, that would be a huge problem. The mages are arguably stronger than the warriors, because the warriors are melee. They're very good at sitting in the front, taking damage, and absorbing hits for you. Skeleton warriors basically come in a few varieties. You have the skirmishers, which deal 30% increased damage, but they have 15% reduced life, which is terrible, because what this means is that they die very quickly. Now, a full summon build needs to lean heavily into its summons. You need to run the aspect for extra 2 warriors. You need to run the aspect for the extra 2 mages. You need to run the aspect where your minions deal bonus damage the longer they've been alive. You need to roll affixes that give extra health to your minions. You need to run the affixes that give extra attack speed to your minions. That means that a summon build is not just losing 2 of its slots. Like, let's explain how a Summon-mancer works. You run skeletons, you're running golem. So what does that leave you? Basic, core, a corpse skill, whether that's explosion or corpse tendrils, and then your last remaining spot is either ultimate skill, bone spirit if you're bone build, a curse, because curses really only benefit summon mancers, and blood mist, because it's your defensive skill. Like, you can't take the second core skill like you could if you were a solo mancer. Blood mist is much harder to fit into your build, because your build is essentially, my minions sit in front and take hits for me, and you just pray you don't get hard crowd controlled. That's what makes Necromancer feel really bad to play. They have 1 skill in their entire tree that gives you any sort of defensive utility. 1 skill. Every other class in the game has multiple options. Necromancer gets 1. That's terrible. So automatically, you have this hard decision, right? Whereas, if you're a Summon Mancer, if you're not a Summon Mancer, if you're a Solo Mancer, this is my Solo Mancer. I have a Golem. Let's look at Solo Mancer. You have a basic, you have a core, right? You have a corpse skill, whether that's explosion or tendrils. You have an ultimate skill. That's 4 of your slots, okay? You're not running a corpse because they really don't benefit you. If you're Bone Spirit, you can run that if you're solo Bone. You can run Bone Spirit, and then your other conflicting slot would either be Blood Mist or Golem, right? Or you can run the other corpse skill. And if you're not running Bone, if you're running, say, Blood, you go Basic, both the Bloods, Blood Mist, random corpse skill, Golem, or Ultimate. Like, that's your 7 slots fighting for 6. And if you're Shadow, what you're going to do is, you're going to do Basic, you're going to do at least 1 of the cores, maybe 2. A corpse skill, whether it's Explosion or Tendrils, right? And then an ultimate, which is probably going to be either Blood Wave or Bone Storm, right? There's your 4, and your other 2 spots are either going to be other corpse skill, Golem, other damage option, fighting for those remaining spots. Like, you don't have these big decisions to make on a Summon Mancer. You have so much more freedom. Now, why I say you want to keep a Golem is a Golem is just handy. Golems are pretty good. And when I explain the defensive and utility options, you'll kind of see why I think a Golem is always a good option. All the Golems are good. The Bone Golem gets bonus life, bonus thorns, or it can generate corpses, although that one is shitty because you don't want it to take that much damage. The Blood Golem either can be used as a shield for you, especially if you're a melee, tanky necro. You want the blood golem where it absorbs 15% of the damage you take. Now, that means your blood golem will die a lot, but it is pretty good at keeping you alive longer. The healthy one is good because it's while healthy, your blood golem gets damage reduction and increased damage. That benefits, that is just such a significant increase. And then the iron golem, where it either gets a slam attack that makes enemies vulnerable when you command it, or every fourth attack does a shockwave behind it, which is pretty good. All of these minion types right here are reasonably good. Bone works better in a summon build. Blood works better in a solo build. Iron to me works better if you need vulnerable. Like if you're not running Bone and you don't have a lot of vulnerable procs, you want to run the Iron Golem for the proc on it. Other than that, I'd say the Iron Golem is probably the weakest. The minions, the skeletons, though, feel really bland and generic. So you have Skirmisher, bonus damage, less health. What's its gimmicks? You can either have 5 of them without a legendary aspect versus the normal 4, or you can get, each time you critically strike, your warriors critically strike. That's good for Bone. The problem is it happens every 3 seconds. Now, you'll be getting crits more than every 3 seconds, so it feels kind of wasted. Also, they die too quickly. You can get Defenders. Defenders are just your generic standard enemy type, but with 15% more health, which is good. They can either negate a direct damage attack every 6 seconds, which is very weak, or increase thorns, which is good for making enemies kill them, especially if you're trying to use them like a shield, like I try and do. Then you have Reapers. Reapers deal the most damage per hit because of their scythe attacks, with the special windup. However, what makes them suck is that scythe attack takes 2.5 seconds to activate, meaning their overall DPS is much lower, even though they hit harder. In addition to that, their bonuses aren't great. Minor percentage to form a corpse, or reduced cooldown on their attacks. The skeleton mages are better because of cold. Cold skeleton mages just hard carry the entire summon tree. Shadow mages basically either get a random stun or an extra attack. Not great. Bone is very unique. So, Bone mages kill themselves to attack, but they deal more damage than the other mages. The problem is that they're constantly dying, and you're constantly resummoning them. Which means you're constantly playing this tycoon simulator of, my mage is dead, I summon my mage. My mage is dead, I summon my mage. Rather than actually attacking, per se. The upgrades for them are good, but the mages themselves suck. The reason why cold mages are just so good is because cold mages chill enemies when they attack. It's 10% chill per attack, and this is per minion. So if you have 3 mages up, and each mage is hitting the same target, it's applying 30% chill, basically. And then they'll eventually freeze. The first upgrade of gaining essence, not really great. The second one, where it's the frozen one, makes them vulnerable. Again, this is an extra source of vulnerable. So if you're a Necromancer that is not playing Bone, you want cold mages, and you want the Iron Golem. Here's the main issue. You don't want to run a Necromancer because you lose 2 slots. And there are decent utility skills in your tree. But what do you get for sacrificing them, right? Like, hey, you sacrifice the minions so you get some power, right? Most people just sacrifice the minions so they're not losing 2 slots. And because minion build isn't great, it requires a lot of work to get good. Alright, let's look at your sacrifice options. Now, the main reason I don't sacrifice golems is their sacrifice options are terrible. 10% increased attack speed. That's good. It stacks with other things. Here's the problem. That's not worth losing a golem for. The golem is better than that. Maximum life increased by 10%, but you lose a golem. Here's the thing. I can get that by running rubies in my gear, right? If I'm desperate for extra life, losing my golem isn't going to help me. Not to mention, again, blood golem absorbing 15% of the damage you would take is just better than flat 10% maximum life. Iron golem, 30% crit damage, but you lose a golem. If you're trying to get the biggest bone spear nuke possible, you'll run this. I really, again, I think a golem is better than that. I think golems are just better. They have a slam attack on a cooldown. They're tanky. They deal decent damage. I like the golem. The mages and the warriors you can kind of sacrifice. What's your bonus for sacrificing warriors and mages, you would say? Skirmishers, 5% crit chance. Not good. 15% non-physical resistance, which is the one resistance you don't want. That's flat resistances across the board, like poison, cold, shadow, which are terrible right now. Reapers, increased shadow damage. Okay, if you run a Shadowmancer, very good. If you run bone and blood, this is terrible. If you're running bone, you kind of want crit. If you're running blood, you kind of want the crit. If you're running shadow, you want this. What about mages? Maximum essence increase. I guess that's good for bigger bone spirit nuke. Any class can benefit from this. Increased damage to vulnerable enemies is good for maximum bone spear nuke. Overpower damage is good for the blood build and pretty much nothing else. That's why you see me running this. Especially 40% overpower damage is nothing to snuff at. The reason why I'm running that is because I'm blood build. If I wasn't blood, I would be running the essence one. Here's the thing though. None of these changes are really impactful enough. Like, they don't make you feel like, this is such a tough choice. Legitimately, the reason why you would be sacrificing is for the extra room. Now let's talk about what makes Necromancer shitty. Besides the summon mechanic. They don't have a lot of utility skills. There's no movement skill. There's one defensive skill. We'll come back to the defensive skill. Bone Prison. Quite possibly the worst skill in the game. 18-second cooldown. It summons a ring of bones that locks a target in until they either break through it or the 6 seconds is up. Note, that keeps you from attacking it. I hate doing Legion events with people because they spawn bone prisons and trap enemies that don't need to be trapped, or they trap players that don't need to be trapped. The bonuses that you can get, you can use it to generate essence, you can use it to generate vulnerable, you can use it to generate fortify. That's the only reason you would ever run bone prison, and it's just fighting for so many better slots. It's terrible. Curses are only really good in summon play, but you don't have the slot for it, is the biggest issue. Iron Maiden is the weaker of the two. It basically gives thorns. Anytime an enemy that's afflicted by it hits something, it deals damage, and you can remove the essence cost from it. The main issue with it is that there's not a good indicator to show you what enemies are afflicted by it. Sure, it shows you a little area on the ground, but that area on the ground doesn't last 10 seconds. It only lasts 3 seconds. But the enemies are afflicted for 10 seconds. There's no cursor over the enemy's head saying it's been affected. That's a quality of life change that they could make. In addition to this, it's not good. You're literally only using it for essence generation and healing. You're not using it for the thorns. You use it for essence generation and healing. There's a build where you just don't run a basic skill and you use Iron Maiden to generate essence, which is fine, but it only works every 10 seconds, realistically. Decrepify is very good. Enemies hit by it are slowed by 40%, and they deal 20% less damage. Very good. Problem. Same UI issue that Iron Maiden has. It doesn't have an indicator over its head letting you know, hey, it's affected by Decrepify. In addition to this, the bonuses that it has aren't great. There's 2 lucky hit chances for a stun or cooldown reduction. Or minions can randomly kill enemies. Now, this is stronger than the Reap one, but the thing is, none of these are any, like, good. Like, base Decrepify is good. The lucky hit chance on this is very low. The lucky hit chance on this is very low. And this is random as fuck. These skills aren't very good. I genuinely, another issue as well, what makes Iron Maiden useful is there's no essence cost. I can cast this for free and not worry about my essence from my damage skills being affected. This requires essence. I can't just spam this willy-nilly. So these options are lackluster, and I'm normally fighting to fit them into a build because of that. Bone Spirit we've already talked about is only in Bone. I wouldn't recommend it in any other build. Now, what does that leave you? The 2 Corpse skills and Blood Mist. You need to run one of the Corpse skills because interacting with corpses is very good. Corpse Explosion triggers lucky hit chances a lot. Very good for that. You have 2 options on Corpse Explosion. One is Corpse Explosion's base form, where you deal a massive amount of damage over 6 seconds. So basically, anytime you pop a corpse, you have these lingering damage over time fields, which is good if you're constantly nuking corpses. The damage isn't great, but you can get a lot of passive damage for free. The other one, if you, for example, if you didn't run this node right here, if you ran this one, where you get bonus damage to slowed, stunned, and vulnerable, and these stack, which is very good, in my opinion. This makes it work well with Bone. This makes it work well with Decrepify. The downside to it is you don't get that area of effect damage. It's actually a lot less damage. It's about 40% damage instead of 110%, but it's instant. All of these consume corpses. What this does is keep enemies from getting resurrected, and it triggers some of your other passives, like Grim Harvest, where consuming a corpse generates essence. Now, they had to nerf this twice. It's still good, but basically it allows Corpse Explosion. If you can generate enough corpses, you no longer need a basic skill. Your minions can help with that. Some of your skills can help with that. Generally, your strategy is going to be, I nuke, I consume all the corpses to get my essence back, I nuke, I consume all my corpses. If you don't have a lot of corpses to consume, Corpse Explosion isn't great. Corpse Explosion is primarily there for the consumption of corpses. If you don't need to consume corpses, Corpse Tendrils is better. Now, Corpse Explosion does have one thing going for it. No cooldown, no essence cost. If you have a corpse, you can use it. No other requirement. Corpse Tendrils is pretty good. What it does is it's a cooldown. It picks a corpse. It sucks enemies into the corpse. It doesn't consume the corpse. The damage isn't great, but what it does is it pulls enemies in, it stuns them, so it keeps them there. Very good for team play. Very good for some of the other bonuses. You can get the slow, which is very shit. I mean, they're going to get pulled in. You can get either Blood Orb or Vulnerable, which are very good, depending on your build. If you want Fortify and Healing, you run Blood Orb. If you want Vulnerable procs, you run this. The main reason why the Bone Spear build got nuked to the degree that it did is because it is a very high crit, high vulnerable skill. You combo that with Corpse Tendrils, which is sucking them together for a guaranteed hit, and is guaranteeing vulnerable damage, and there's a legendary aspect that increases crit chance and crit damage on Corpse Tendrils. It's very easy to see why it got nerfed. The downside to me is this. Quality of life, once again. The issue that the curses have is kind of affected on corpse tendrils. The pull-in is very slow. The target on the corpse isn't consistent. It targets corpses I don't necessarily want. And because the pull-in time is slow, enemies can sometimes leave the area. It doesn't work against bosses. It doesn't work against chunkier elites. I find it very inconsistent, which is why I don't choose to run it. If I did run it, it's great. You can build around it very easily, but I find it inconsistent. Now we have the big problem. Everything that I've mentioned is offensive, right? Everything is offensive. Necromancer has one singular skill that is a defensive and mobility option. And it is the problem with the Necromancer class. It's the only one that has one, and it's terrible. Blood Mist, 24-second cooldown. That's fine, that's on par with Sorceress skills. Disperse into a bloody mist, becoming immune for 3 seconds. Alright, so right off the bat we have Blood Mist Blood Mist is basically Flame Shield, in that it's complete immunity, crowd control immunity, damage immunity. Okay, good. Slightly longer duration. Okay, good. What's the problem? Your movement speed is reduced by 20%. Okay. It deals damage, but nowhere near enough compared to Flame Shield. It heals, nowhere near enough compared to Flame Shield. So, why is this skill bad? Okay. You could just look at this at face value and say, okay, so you become completely damage immune for 3 seconds, but you move slower, right? Okay. Problem is you can't do anything while you're in it. You see, you can't attack while you're in it. You can't consume corpses while you're in it. You can move, and you can pop your healing potion. That's what you can do. You can't cancel out of it either. You're stuck in it for 3 seconds. Okay, well, surely the upgrades make it that overpower reduces the cooldown. No, it's good. I can have that more consistently in a blood build. In Bone and Shadow, it's worthless because you're not reliably overpowered. Okay, well, that's just a nice quality of life buff. A lot of skills have a mediocre effect. I'm sure the upgrades are Fortify. Very good. That's good. That's good. When it hits an enemy. That procs once per enemy, by the way. Oh. A corpse that I can't interact with. Thank you. Now, this is the problem. You could look at this skill and say, that's fine. It's just a damage immunity skill for 3 seconds. Most classes would kill for... Barbarians would kill for damage immunity for 3 seconds. Crowd control and damage immunity. Why are you saying this skill is bad? Well, let's start that you need 3 legendary aspects to make this viable. First off, you need the legendary aspect that removes your movement speed penalty and activates corpse explosion when you move over a corpse, and it reduces cooldown by 1 second when you move over a corpse. And you need the one where you get bonus movement speed while you're crowd control immune for duration afterwards. You need 3 legendary aspects in order to make one skill viable, which is so restrictive to your legendary aspects. Because your boots are gone, your pants are gone, your amulet or one of your rings is gone. Generally a ring. So you're losing a ring, boots, and pants automatically. Now, boots are kind of easy. You can forget about the boots. Not really a lot of great. The ring is hard to come by because generally you want to chuck mage, and if you're a summon mancer, you want to chuck mage and warrior onto your ring. And if you're a solo mancer, you would more of your generic skills on a ring. Blood Mist just consumes so much room on your skill bar. Like, I literally chose a golem over Blood Mist. Yes, hard crowd control is the bane of your existence as a Necromancer player, but this skill is too much of a death sentence. Not being able to attack for 3 seconds is a problem. I never want to be standing still, dealing no damage for 3 seconds, unless I'm using Deep Freeze on Sorceress. That's why I don't run Shred. So you're thinking, okay, it's a glass cannon build, right? No real defense, great offensive options. Why is Necromancer isn't that bad? You just don't like the playstyle. Well, let's talk about the legendary. The ultimates kind of suck. Army of the Dead's the worst one. It's a long cooldown for no apparent reason. It summons exploding skeletons for 7 seconds. That might give you a corpse. And also raises your warriors and your mages if they're dead when you cast them. But the only legendary aspect that's around this that's any good is 90% damage reduction and bonus attack speed wall to your minions when you activate Army of the Dead. Basically, Army of the Dead acts as a 7-second power-up for your minions. So it's kind of terrible. There's no reason to run it. Then you have Blood Wave. Blood Wave is a 50-second cooldown for an ability that hits 1 time without a legendary aspect. It deals chunky damage that knocks back enemies. The chunky damage is outclassed by other skills. Look at this. Deals 120% damage. Bone Spirit deals more damage. Look at that. That is 1,600 damage. This is 2,300 damage. Well, that's not more. But I'm getting 3% bonus damage per point of spirit of essence. Meaning if I have 100 spirit, I'm getting a bonus 30% damage. Which takes me to about 113%. Right around there. And this crits. This doesn't reliably crit. Well, surely there's another... Oh, it gives me a Blood Orbs and a mediocre slow. Great. You need a legendary aspect where the tidal wave hits 2 more times but deals less damage. And you need the one where you get bonus cold skills in order for this to work. That's problematic to me. Then you have Bone Storm. Bone Storm works best if you have a golem as well, so now you're losing another slot. But the way it works is, you get a circling vortex around you for 10 seconds. It deals damage to enemies that are in that radius. The damage is pretty good. You get damage reduction and crit chance. Obviously, it's good for Bone. Any build can benefit, though, because it gives you damage reduction. In addition, there's a few legendary aspects that are good, like the consumption one, where you consume extra. There's a lot of legendaries that are based around Bone Storm. But you need a golem to get value out of it. So, a summon build, skeletons, golem, Bone Storm, generator spender. That's 1 skill left for either Blood Mist, Curses, Corpse Explosion, Corpse Tendril. You see now why it's so hard to play Necromancer. And again, the passives just aren't there. Ossified Essence is bone only. Rathma's Vigor is generic in the sense that you can get 10% maximum life. So if nothing else, if you're not running bone, if you don't want to run Shadow Blight, if you don't like Kalen's Edict, you can get at least 10% maximum life off of that thing. Yay! If you're in a blood build, it's an extra form of overpower. So you get 3 ways to overpower, which does make Blood Mist cooldown basically non-existent if you think about it. Because you get 2 seconds off the cooldown every time you overpower. If you have 3 skills overpower back to back to back, you've essentially got 6 seconds off, plus the casting time off of them. You shave that from 24 to 12 seconds. Plus, you're in the ability for 3 seconds, so now, again, you're down to 9 seconds. This is very good for blood build. It's good passive. Again, this is good for bone. Good passive. Shadow Blight, again, I'm not going to comment on this because I don't play the Shadow build. I'll assume it's okay. This skill right here, though, is absolutely terrible. If you have not taken damage in 2 seconds, this means that damage over time negates it. If you are fortified, this doesn't proc. That's problematic. Like, if your fortify takes instead of your health, that doesn't matter. It makes it so that your minions get 15% attack speed. It's doubled if you have more than 7, which is pretty easy to do in a summon build. Meaning, you get 30% attack speed to your minions. Very good. Problem. You have to not take damage for 2 seconds. And your minions need to not die. If your minions die, you lose the bonus. If you take any damage, you lose the bonus. So, even the most minute amount of damage, like ghouls hitting you, you lose the bonus. This is one of the worst skills in the game, because of that fact. To me, it should be, as long as you're healthy, or if you're above 90% health, or if you haven't been crowd controlled in the last 15 seconds, or something like that. But just, oh, you can't take damage. Like, there's a similar skill, Inspiring Leader. If you have been healthy for at least 4 seconds, you and your minions get 4, 8, 12% attack speed. This isn't very good, because the bonus isn't great. It's only 12%. But, again, it's much easier to activate. This skill for 3 points is better than this skill. If I'm running full summon, I would run Rathma's Vigor. Just for a generic 10% flat bonus. In addition, so many of the passives in the tree are meaningless. This is bugged right now, so there's no point in running that. This is mediocre. You need to use corpses. If you're not using corpses, this is trash. Particularly Corpse Explosion. If you're running Corpse Tendrils, you need not worry about this skill at all. This is good for Flat Thorns. This is good for Essence Generation. This is just underwhelming. 9% damage or increased damage after you consume a corpse. The duration is good at 6 seconds. But the downside is that your minions don't benefit from that. If they did, it would be fine. Increased damage to curse enemies is good for Decrepify, not really for Iron Maiden, and it's not worth the points. Death's Embrace, not really great. You tend to be at range anyways, and the numbers aren't great on it. Death Reach, not really great, because a lot of enemies bum rush you. Increased... oh, fuck. This has been happening a lot. Increased health and stuff like that. So summing up Necromancer, it's a glass cannon. It does its job very well. It does tons of damage. It has next to no survivability at all. Very fun class to play, but can be very infuriating as you push high level play. What I would do to buff it, minions need a buff. Sacrifice bonuses need a significant buff in my opinion. This class, more than any, benefits from having extra skill slots. It's broken in Season because there's a heart where your corpse skills cast automatically. But, honestly, this is a class where the curses need a buff. It needs another damage, immunity, or crowd control immunity skill. Otherwise, it will be completely dead within a couple weeks. It's kind of like Sorceress right now. Sorceress is the most played class in the game, and it's also the most dropped class in the game. Why would you play Sorceress when you can go play Necromancer, which has less survivability and more damage? It's much more fun to play Necromancer than it is to play Sorceress, right? That's Sorceress's problem. Necromancer, though, is in this boat Because it's like, okay, so if I'm going to play a glass cannon, why would I play Necromancer when I could go play Rogue, which can just 2-tap bosses? Like, the amount of work required for Necromancer to be broken is higher than just 2 legendary aspects on a Rogue. So, definitely some buffs